When we aren't present, we tend to amplify every little challenge in our lives, often without even realizing what we're doing. Any minor inconvenience that we may have, any small little thing that goes wrong just in our day-to-day lives can suddenly feel incredibly overwhelming when we're lost in our thoughts. And that's because the mind doesn't just see what's happening, it interprets it, it spins stories around it, it projects it into the future, and a small mistake can become proof that we're failing or we're falling behind, or what we have now just isn't enough, or where we are right now isn't good enough. Without presence in our lives, we don't just experience the situation, we experience the mental narrative we've built around it. And that narrative is almost always more painful than the actual reality of what's going on. It's the negative thoughts that we consistently think, that mental commentary that goes on internally when something doesn't go our way. That's most of the time more painful and more annoying than the actual event that's happening in our lives. I know for me personally, when I don't stay consistent with my presence practice, when I go a few days without meditating, or I'm just so busy in whatever it is I'm doing, I forget my presence foundation. I forget my presence practices that I do, right? Like taking a few deep breaths throughout the course of my day, just being able to pause and breathe consciously throughout the course of your day. I get overwhelmed. I get lost in thought. My mind starts going on nonstop about, where I'm at right now, and maybe I should be further along, or I just get these feelings. And I'm sure it's common. I'm sure there's other people who listen to this who also experience the same thing. But it's when I lose touch with that presence practice that I've built, that's when my mind starts to go in a million different directions and I start to feel like shit. It's only when I'm consistent with my presence practice and I immerse myself more in the now frequently throughout the course of my day, throughout the course of my week, it's only then when I feel like myself. I know when I have those negative thoughts, when I'm overthinking, when I feel anxious, and it's nothing like extreme, but I know personally when I do overthink, it's because I'm veering further and further away from the now. When I'm consistent with my meditations, when I'm consistent with my pockets of presence, that's when I feel more myself. That's when I feel more centered, more grounded, and more focused, and just a better version of myself. I feel like a better version of myself the more present I am. And I think that's because presence serves as that foundation for me. I'm able to lean on my presence practices, my meditation, my pockets of presence in times of stress, in times of anxiety, and that calms me down. I start to really get clear about what's really important in my life. I start to really get clear about, where I'm at and how far I've come, and it reminds me to be grateful the more present I am. Presence acts like a lens that brings clarity to what's actually happening. When you're grounded in the moment, you're centered, a problem that you may have is just a problem. It's not a catastrophe. It's not a reflection of your worth, and it's not a sign that everything in your life is going wrong. It's just a problem. And when you see things as what they actually are, instead of what your mind constantly is saying it is, you're able to find solutions way easier. You see the problem for what it is, and you're able to respond to it appropriately and then let it go. Without that sense of presence, without presence being the foundation, again, just for me in my life, I tend to react instead of respond appropriately. And I make everything a lot bigger than it needs to be. My internal experience and the mental noise, the mental narrative becomes louder than the actual world around me, than the actual problem itself, than what actually is happening in front of me. So much suffering, I feel like, we feel in everyday life isn't from what's happening, but from how we think about what's happening. When you're uncentered, when you are ungrounded, you're more likely to believe those thoughts automatically. You're more likely to identify yourself with that mental chatter. And you're living in a future that hasn't happened yet, or a past that can't be changed. And you're missing the calm and clarity that's available to us all when you're more present. By staying centered, by being grounded, by coming back to your presence foundation, you shrink problems back down to their actual size. And when you shrink problems down to their actual size, this gives you the capacity to face them. And like I said, just respond in a way that you would like to respond, rather than just react impulsively. Being more present, being more in the moment doesn't eliminate the problems that we face in life, or the challenges that we face, or the resistance that we experience in life, but it dramatically shifts how heavy they feel and how we're able to respond to these challenges that do come up. Like, for me personally, when I started reading Eckhart Tolle, for example, like, I started to really come to the realization that the mind has a tendency to overthink, to judge, to analyze, and to create stories around what's happening. And those stories, that mental narrative, is what creates most of the stress that we experience, most of the anxiety that we experience. At least for me, at least in my life, I would be overthinking things to a point that would make me forget about the growth and the progress that I've already made in my life. And that's one thing that I would always come back to. Like, I would forget to be grateful and forget to acknowledge the progress that I've already made in my life when I veered further and further away from my presence practice, and thus started to overthink more. And I would judge myself more when I veered further and further away from my presence practice, when I didn't meditate for a few days, when I wasn't present, when I got so sucked into whatever it is I was doing. There's a great quote from A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, and the quote goes, "The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about it. Be aware of the thoughts you are thinking. Separate them from the situation, which is always neutral, which is always as it is." The more present I am in my daily life, the more centered I am, the more grounded I am, the more I come back to that foundation, my foundation, which is presence, which is my meditations that I do, which is, taking conscious deep breaths throughout the day, having those pockets of presence. The less I identify myself with that mental noise that overthinks, that analyzes constantly, that judges, that creates stories around what's happening. Instead of overthinking, instead of judging myself, I'm just able to look at the situation at face value, and if there's a problem that needs to be solved, I'm able to respond appropriately, respond in a way that I want to respond, and then take action to find a solution to solve that problem. If you're stressed out, if you're overthinking everything, if you feel like your mind is just going down that train of thought all the time, every day, take a deep breath and lean on your foundation. Create space internally. Learn to become more centered, more grounded by leaning on your presence practice. And if you don't have a presence practice yet, spend 5 to 10 minutes every day meditating just in your own presence, quietly by yourself. If you're just, going throughout the course of your day, you're at work, you're commuting, you're going grocery shopping, you're doing your laundry, whatever it is you're doing, take a deep breath. Like, remind yourself to be more present. Don't just do whatever it is you're doing as a means to an end. Focus on incorporating more moments of conscious presence into your daily life, and you will build that reservoir or foundation of presence within you that you're able to lean on in times of stress, or when you're overwhelmed, or when things don't necessarily go your way, or you're facing resistance, or whatever it is. Because that kind of shit happens. Like, it's life, right? Like, you're gonna experience ups and downs, but it's how you are able to lean on your foundation and your relationship with the present moment. That is what's ultimately going to enable you to power through those negative times, easier and navigate them easier. So you're able to come out on top. Like I said, for me personally, when things are going well and I forget to meditate for a few days, or I forget to incorporate my pockets of presence throughout the course of my day, that's when I start to overthink. That's when I start to judge myself or compare myself. And I just remember, go back to presence, go back to what helped you get to that good feeling. And that's my meditations, that's those pockets of presence. So if you're listening to this and you're stressed out, or you feel overwhelmed, or, there have been a few days in a row where you feel like you haven't been present and your mind is just, going off, thinking about the past, thinking about the future. There's just this narrative constantly, this mental noise. Bring it back. Take a deep breath. Return back to your meditations. Return back to those pockets of presence and recenter yourself and ground yourself, and hopefully that can help. It's definitely helped me. Just go back to your routine. Go back to your good habits. So that's all I really wanted to get across in this recording. Thank you for being a part of Presence of Being, and I'll see you in the next recording very soon.